Thank you. I heard it was cold up here today. I got my snowshoes on and everything. I came prepared for the worst of the weather. It's like spring up here. So I come from Washington today, and I have good news and bad news. The good news is your government is open. The bad news is your government's open. Your government is open and borrows about $1 million every minute. And I've come here today to tell you whose fault it is. You think it's Democrats' fault? You think it's Republicans' fault? It's both parties' fault. Both parties are looting the Treasury. In fact, about a month ago, I kept them up till 3 in the morning because they were raising the debt ceiling yet again. They were raising the debt ceiling not even a specific amount, like, let's say, $1 trillion. No specified amount. They're just raising the debt ceiling till March of 2017. So we're giving this president, who hasn't shown much fiscal conservatism, we're giving him an unspecified amount of money he can borrow over the next year and a half. Now, why did we do this? Well, people say, oh, well, we don't control the presidency, so we don't have any leverage. We control both houses of Congress. And my complaint is I don't think we're really adequately using our leverage at all. When I was first elected in 2011, we had a big battle over raising the debt ceiling. And you know what we did? We used our leverage to say we're not going to raise the debt ceiling unless there is some kind of reform. So we did institute a reform. We said without a budget, there'll be a sequester, which was sort of across the board, not really a cut. And realize when everybody complains about the sequester, it was not a cut in spending. It was a cut in the rate of growth of spending. So what have we done? We've largely abandoned all of that. In 2013, Paul Ryan and Patty Murray came together and we got rid of the first $1 billion in new military spending. I'm for a strong national defense, but we can't become stronger from bankruptcy court. How do we project strength? How is it strong as a country to get further and further mired into debt? We also need to recognize how much we do spend. And I think it is the priority. It should be the priority of what we spend is to defend the country. But the thing is that we already spend more defending the country than the next 10 countries combined. You add Russia to China and 8 more countries, and you get to what we spend. We are spending a lot of money defending the country. Now, are we always spending it wisely? Maybe not. We spent $43 million of national defense money on a natural gas station in Afghanistan. One, what business is it of ours at all to be building a gas station in Afghanistan? But second, a natural gas station. Think about it. They don't even have cars in Afghanistan, much less natural gas-powered cars. Do you think a natural gas station in Derry would all of a sudden be successful? What if the government came and built a natural gas station here? Nobody has a natural gas car. Who's going to pay the money to convert to it? Maybe some in America, nobody in Afghanistan. It cost $43 million. How much is the estimate of how much it should have cost? $500,000. It's estimated to be 83 times what the normal price should be. Someone should go to jail for that. But instead, what happens is the right and the left get together. And then the left has polluted the Defense Department with all these green ideas that we have to prove that we're green in our military because you know what? The president thinks that climate change is more dangerous than terrorism. I'm guessing you would have a tough time convincing those in San Bernardino that the temperature is more important than terrorists with guns. Now, we've had a big debate in the last week or two about whether or not we should have a religious test for those who enter the country. And I don't think we should have a religious test. However, on the other side of the coin, we have Hillary Clinton who says we shouldn't even mention that who the attackers are or what they're crazy about. They're crazy about radical Islam. That's who they are. It is an aberration. I don't think it represents the religion, but if we're not going to name who the enemy is, how are we going to combat the enemy? So I think on the one hand, we do need to know that it's radical Islam. On the other hand, we don't need to paint with a broad broad brush that it's everyone who's Muslim in the world. But we have to do something about our immigration system. You know, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars and we're not going to have any rules about who comes here. I'm right now reading Senator Graham's book, Bob Graham, who used to be in the Senate, who was head of intelligence on 9/11. He was a Democrat, but I think he was a good thinking Democrat in the sense that he went through all the details of who came here and how we missed it. Like 15 times we missed who the people were. But one thing that's important to know of the 9/11 hijackers, who they were legal immigrants to our country. But nobody was checking them. Nobody was vetting them. They all had a visa to come here. In fact, the 20th hijacker, the one we did catch, Moussaoui, remember he was one up in Minnesota trying to fly planes and we did catch him? He came here on a visa waiver because he was a French citizen or he had a French passport. So realize that in this Paris tragedy, everybody that was part of the tragedy, all the killers, were Paris citizens or citizens of France. Do you know what kind of vetting we have for them? Zero. So while I think it's a mistake to have a religious test, it's not a mistake that we should be talking about what we need to do to screen people who want to come here. Now some say, well, refugees are all women and children. Well, that's also not true. And then the president says it's a mistake. In fact, the president's administration, a woman from his administration, told me that she was insulted that I was asking questions about refugees being a potential danger. And I said, well, come to my town. I live in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and 2 Iraqi refugees were admitted and then proceeded to want to buy Stinger missiles to attack us. When we finally did research who they were, after we had already admitted them as refugees, we found that one of them had fingerprints on a bomb fragment from Iraq. He was in our database, but we weren't doing an adequate job screening people. So yes, we should have screening. Now, I would word it a little different. I wouldn't base it on religion, but I would base it on where there's a high threat of terror, and if you're moving here, or you want to be a student here, or you want to come to our country and you're from a high-risk country, yes, you deserve more scrutiny. But unfortunately, even those who are our friends, Europe is our friends. We are great allies with most of the countries of Europe, if not all of them. But yet we still have to have more scrutiny. We can't have visa waiver. So what I've suggested is that people should come here through global entry. What is global entry? It's kind of like frequent flyer program. You have expedited ability to travel, but you have to go through a background check. And I think it's the least we can do for Europe. And I think we have to know who's coming, who's going, whether they overstay their visas. How big is the problem? There are 11 million people in the country illegally. 40% of them are said to have overstayed their visas. Do you think anybody in our government knows who they are? Do you think anybody in our government cares? Do you think anybody in our government is sending any of them back home? No. So we have this enormous millions of people here in our country and we're doing nothing about it. And so I think it's a mistake. We spend hundreds of billions of dollars supposedly on the war on terror, and we're not going to screen adequately the people who come and visit us. So while I disagree with Trump's response to this, I do agree it's high time we talk about this. Instead, what we have in Washington, though, are some, like Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham, who want to collect all of your phone records. They think somehow we're going to be safer if we collect all your phone records, but they're unwilling to protect the border. They're unwilling to have more scrutiny on those who travel. So the one reason they want all Americans to give up their liberty, but they're not willing to have any restrictions on people who aren't under the jurisdiction of the Constitution, people who are not here and wish to come and travel here. And this is another mistake. While I think it defies American sensibilities to want to have a religious test, the Constitution doesn't apply to people not in our country. So if you want to move here, you don't have constitutional rights. You do once you get here, but you don't have a constitutional right to come to our country. So we can have any of a host of rules, and we may want those rules to conform to our sensibilities of what's right and wrong, but the Constitution doesn't apply to those who want to come here until they get here. And we don't have an open door process to say everybody can come. One survey said that if everyone who wanted to come could come, 700 million people would come. Well, that would more than double our population. So obviously most of us believe in some rules on who can come to the country. If we are truly fiscally conservative, we have to decide what that means. And that's what I've been trying to point out on the stage. I think I am the only fiscal conservative. Why? Because many of the people who profess to be conservative are against the Democrats' welfare program, but they're for unlimited spending on the other side of the ledger. You can't be for unlimited spending, even for things that we think government should do. You cannot be for unlimited spending and still call yourself a fiscal conservative. This is why, when Republicans were in charge, from 2000 to 2008, the debt doubled. The national debt went from $5 trillion to $10 trillion. In fact, I decided to run for office because I was upset with Republicans doubling the debt. I was upset with Republicans doubling the size of the Department of Education. I was upset with Republicans bailing out all the banks when the crisis came. So I was upset with big spending Republicans. So we went from $5 to $10 trillion in debt under Republicans, and now we've gone from $10 trillion to $20 trillion under Democrats, with a little bit of assistance from Republicans. So that's my point. I don't want to be either the leader of a party or part of a party that is a little bit less bad than the Democrats, or adds debt a little bit slower than the Democrats. I want to be the party that actually balances budgets. When you look at Washington, and we have votes on balanced budget amendments, everybody votes for it. Every Republican will vote for a balanced budget amendment. But when you put forward a budget that balances, like I've done 3 times, only about a third of the Republicans will vote for it. When you say we shouldn't continue to raise the debt ceiling, there's a huge percentage of Republicans who are not fiscally conservative. At least a third of them don't care. And that's the problem. So when we try to figure out how we go forward as a country, what I'm asking people to think about is, if you're fiscally conservative, if you think that debt is a problem, you don't want to add more debt, there are very few choices. There are none on the Democrat side. And on the Republican side, very few choices, and I would argue there's only one that would actually hold the line on spending across the board and would say we cannot continue to add debt at $1 million a minute. I hope you want to be part of that. I'm going to continue to broadcast that message. We think we have a much stronger campaign that has been reported in the mainstream media, and we're going to see what happens come early February. But thank you very much for coming out. And I'd be happy to take a couple questions. Yes?
How do you get your ideas to Congress?
How do you get the ideas for
any of your ideas for this current Congress or whatever?
I think, keeping up with current events, reading the news. You mean what kind of sources?
No, I mean, how do you get your ideas to pass?
Oh, how do we get them actually to pass? We need a new Congress. That's the honest answer. I mean, for example, my plan for taxes is to have one single rate. Get rid of the tax code, get rid of the IRS, have one rate. 14.5% for business, 14.5% for individual, and get rid of the payroll tax. It would all be in the business tax. That won't pass in this Congress. Now, if I were to win the presidency, my hope is that having a much bigger voice than just being a senator, that I can persuade people to come around to that. But ultimately, you've got to have a changeover in office. So, for example, if you truly are a fiscal conservative and you think the budget ought to be balanced, this Congress will never do it. You should be for term limits also, because we've got to turn the majority of them out and get new people in there. And I've met them all. There is no monopoly of knowledge in Washington. We should turn them out. We should have regular rotation in office. And, I would take 2 terms in the Senate and 6 terms in the House. 12 in the House, 12 in the Senate, and move on. That's a long time. 12 years is a long time. But we have people 30 and 40 years. And sometimes they become more like furniture than anything else. When we rearrange the furniture, we get the same result, kind of thing. But it is difficult to change things under the current powers that be, because sometimes there's not that much difference between Republicans and Democrats after a while. Yes?
You mentioned about getting rid of the IRS and cutting taxes. Exactly. I'm a tax practitioner. I've been in the field.
I'm sorry.
Probably longer. Well, don't be sorry, because we'll all be dead before that happens. All right? I've been in the field for 42 years. And I've seen thousands of tax returns. I've audited them. I'm preparing them now. What are you going to replace it with? And what are you going to replace the IRS with? If you think that people are going to be honest and pay 12 or 14.5 or 17%,
I think what would happen, there's supposed to be some kind of structure. There'll be a structure you pay your taxes to, and there still will be people probably in some kind of revenue collection. But I think if it were very simple and there were very few deductions that you were processing, it'd be very hard to do there are corporations now do 50,000-page tax returns. There are some individuals who do 10,000-page tax returns. They're so complicated that a team of accountants fill them out, and then in the end they don't pay any taxes. This would be harder to have those complicated tax reforms. So I think there wouldn't be a need for as invasive of an IRS that's targeting people. I think it would be pretty easy to tell that everybody's paid their 14.5%. It'd be a very simple tax return that you fill out on one card. Would there still be some people? Yeah, there's going to be some people, but I don't think we'd have the host of what many of us think are aggressive IRS agents delving into all of our purchases, into everything. But I think simplifying it would have great increases in productivity and growth also. One of the things we would do is that we would allow people to 100% expense all of their expenditures in the first year. See, farmers now have to beg and fight to have their combine, a $500,000 combine, to get it deductible, and we pass something called a tax extender. For 1 year we say it's deductible, and the farmer's like, well, is it going to be deductible next year? Oh, we'll tell you at the end of the year when we pass the tax extender package. So stuff like that, if we could make that part of the permanent law. The tax foundation said that just that part of our plan, making everything 100% expenditure, that you can expense it in 1 year, would add 900,000 jobs because of just the increased productivity of people. I look at it this way. I had a small doctor's office, and I went to Office Depot, and I bought $5,000 worth of furniture for my lobby. So I asked my accountant, I said, well, I write that off against my profit, don't I? And he said, yeah, over 36 years. And I'm like, good luck on the furniture lasting 36 years. Good luck on me lasting 36 years. And so we have a crummy tax code, and we ought to get rid of almost all of it, or as much of it as we can. Yes.
I want to thank you for your position here on ending illegal NSA spying. That's important to me. Now, I have a question, thank you for calling on me, that deals with Israel-Palestine and the settlements in the West Bank of Palestine that both Secretary Clinton and Kerry have both said are illegal. And under the Geneva Convention, the Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 49, it is clearly illegal to move the conquering nations, if you will, population into the other area that's been taken over. And now there are about 500,000 illegal Jewish settlers, Israelis, in the West Bank. If you were president, what would be your position on these illegal settlements?
I traveled to Israel and to the West Bank and to Jordan, and I went over there with the intention of trying to figure out Middle East peace, and then I was going to come home and I was going to tell you and everyone else what my plan was for Middle East peace. And I came home thinking that maybe I wasn't smarter than everybody else and maybe I didn't have the answer. I did come home thinking, though, that a big, grand peace plan that is sort of forced from the outside on those who live there probably isn't going to happen. And for a couple different reasons. One of the impediments to, I think, peace plan is Jerusalem, as you mentioned, and the areas around Jerusalem. Many people on the the side of the Palestinians are not going to settle for anything that doesn't have some jurisdiction over Jerusalem. But many on the other side, on the Israeli side, are never going to submit to dividing Jerusalem or giving it back. And they want it through war, and some would say a war they didn't start. So the thing is that there are international sort of UN proclamations, but then the war on the ground, and there is the law according to who has the power. And I don't know that there is an easy answer. I do think that there will not be an answer that is enforced from the outside, that no other country is going to be able to tell, the same way we wouldn't want any country telling us who can buy what land and where people can live outside of New York City. A lot of the land, the Israelis will argue, is sold privately from one private individual to another. So when we have a racial law in our country that says that a Jew can't buy land where an Arab lives currently, or vice versa, we wouldn't have those laws. So there's a lot of different perspectives as to the way to look at it. I do think both sides have to give some, but I really think that the ultimate peace is probably going to be less dramatic and more incremental. And I suggested to the Israeli government when I was over there that people are never going to be, the violence will never end until people are less unhappy. And I know that sounds really cliche, but there's got to be a way to make people less unhappy, improving trade, improving economic well-being. Even with Gaza, I suggested face-to-face with Netanyahu, I said, maybe someday Gaza, if there wasn't a violent faction ruling Gaza, there could be a joint port in Gaza where there is some joint security. Israel probably would have to have joint security with it. over a long period of time, where Gaza and Israel had customs that would be a Gaza port, that was basically the revenue and everything went to Gaza. It would be much happier, everybody would be much happier, that less likely to be violence. The problem with getting to any of those things is Hamas routinely launches missiles into Israel. If you're on Hamas's side, you can say, well, Israel started it, and Israel can say Hamas started it. But for better or worse, missiles do go into Israel, so they're not inclined to negotiate with Hamas. So there's so many impediments to it, but I did come home thinking that peace and improvement there will probably be more incremental than dramatic, and that maybe outside powers like the U.S. Are not going to be able to enforce our opinion on people who live there.
One point. You said you wanted to stop the $3 billion plus aid to Israel, and I applaud you on that. I don't know if you've changed your position since then.
I'm ultimately not for any foreign aid, particularly if it comes out of deficits. I've chosen, as we've done it, though, to stop foreign aid to countries that actually overtly are enemies, which I think ought to stop first. So,
Thank you.
yes, young man.
When the Constitution was born, the Second Amendment states that everyone has the right to bear arms. And you are for this. But if we take the Constitution out of the situation, why do you feel that U.S. citizens need guns? How are guns relevant today?
Well, I think when it comes to law, you can't take the Constitution out of it. So the only way you can say, let's say somebody wants a law and says, I think it would be better off if we didn't have any guns and we said no gun ownership, you'd have to change the Constitution. And when the founders wrote down the Bill of Rights and they put them in there, the understanding was it would be very difficult to take away these rights. So, it takes 2/3 of Congress to get an amendment started, then it takes 3/4 of the legislatures. So it's supposed to be very hard. We don't want things like the Second Amendment or, frankly, the First Amendment or the Fourth. We don't want it to be easy for a simple majority to take away those rights. So a simple majority can't take away the rights. If you're just looking and saying, well, guns are a good thing or a bad thing, they're both. Good people with guns use them as self-defense or for hunting or for sportsmanship and marksmanship. And bad people with guns rob good people. And the only way we stop sometimes bad people is for good people to have guns. We consider the police to be good people. We consider, various members of our citizenry to be good people. We're at a point now where there are bad people who come among us. Some are just criminals and thugs, and some of them are criminals, thugs, and terrorists all wrapped into one. The District of Columbia police chief recently came out and she said, if you see an armed assailant, take them down. Because by the time you wait for the police to show up, even if it's 5 minutes, they may have killed 20 people. Because these people are out to murder people. But my question to the D.C. police chief was, what am I going to take them down with, my hands? You cannot own a gun in Washington, D.C., and you don't have concealed carry in Washington, D.C., and so I think gun ownership can be a deterrent to violence. Now, some will say, well, look at these terrible tragedies in these gun-free zones, in schools and in government buildings. In San Bernardino, not many of the people who are arguing for gun control mentioned that they were in a building where no guns were allowed. We might have had a better chance, or some of those people might have had a better chance had there been someone in the building with concealed carry, or maybe a policeman or a former policeman that happened to have a weapon in the building. So I think there are a lot of reasons why guns can be a deterrent. I think also if we put out an announcement, I'd put out an announcement across the United States saying that we're getting rid of all the gun-free zones, and that if you go into a school, guess what? There may be a teacher or a principal or a janitor with a concealed carry. There may be a policeman in there. There may be a security guard. You're not going to know. When you show up to shoot people at a school, guess what? They're going to be defended.
Senator?
Yes.
People are understandably very nervous or frightened of terrorism. There's another fear that may not be so evident, but may be equally or more important in the long run, and that's the fear of nuclear war. Even though the Cold War has long since passed, both the U.S. and Russia maintain their nuclear weapons on air trigger alert, which means they can very quickly be launched. The former vice chair of the Joint Chiefs, James Cartwright, has suggested that we start negotiating that away, that we and the Russians negotiate taking first some of these weapons off of air trigger alert, simply to reduce the possibility that there might be a tragic accident. One side thinking there's an attack and what it was a flock of birds, but the other side pushes the button anyway. Would you be sympathetic to that form of negotiation?
I'm acquainted with General Cartwright and have met him on several occasions, and I have listened to what he has to say on this. This is an incredibly important question, and I'll kind of tie it into another context. In the Republican debate on the stage, you've seen people saying, oh, I'm not talking to Putin. We shouldn't talk to Putin. We should have a no-fly zone. These are the kind of people that could lead to the situation we're talking about. So we went through 70 years of a Cold War, and it was sort of a hair-trigger atmosphere. It was very, very dangerous. But fortunately, we had people in the White House, both Republican and Democrat, who showed wisdom and showed restraint. Reagan, even among them, many of the Democrats hated Reagan, but you know what? Reagan talked with Gorbachev. Reagan negotiated from a position of strength, and he actually did lower the nuclear arsenal during that. So I think there is an opportunity, but the most important thing you have to do if you want to reduce the nuclear arsenal is you have to start out with open communications. Even when we don't like what Putin is doing, even though we don't like him flying in the space over there, over Iraq, we need people that have enough wisdom to say we still need to talk with Russia. You know, but you've got Hillary Clinton, Marco Rubio, Carly Fiorina, and half a dozen others up there saying, I'm not going to talk to Putin, and I'm going to have a no-fly zone on day one. It's like, really? That means you're going to shoot down Russian planes and risk a nuclear confrontation? So this is a serious business, and that's why I think it's important that my voice be heard on that stage, because I'm one of the few voices saying that if we have discussion, maybe we can reduce some of our nuclear arsenal.
Thank you.
Straight here.
I know you're not for Common Core, but what are your plans for the education system? Because Common Core has been a bane of my existence.
Has been what?
It's been a bane of my existence.
Yeah. You know, the thing is that I think politicians need to admit that we don't know all the best answers for what we should do with education. It's one reason why it shouldn't be centralized in the hands of politicians who don't know anything about education. So that's why I don't want it done in Washington. And so while I don't want kids to be tested to death, and I don't want Washington telling them to be tested to death, doesn't mean I'm absolutely opposed to national tests. When I was a kid, there was no Department of Education, but I took the SAT, I took the ACT, they're national tests. I took the California Standard or Achievement Test. I may have taken the Iowa test, or my kids may have taken the Iowa test. So we've always sort of chosen tests over a while just so we compare ourselves with other states. But what happened is we became so burdened with rules from Washington that every teacher was coming up to me and saying, we're overburdened with these tests. We're teaching, all we're doing is testing these kids over and over again, and then we're teaching them how to take the test. And developing a more sensible curriculum, we're prevented from all the time we're spending on the testing. So I think the first thing is to decentralize. So I'm for decentralized control, where each community, the teachers have more power, the principals have more power, the parents have more power, the state has more power, but the federal government has a lot less involvement, less power. I think the one truly transformational thing that could happen in education is the internet. And it may sound cliche, it's like, oh, well, we've had it for 20 years, why don't we have it? Because I think the educational establishment has been opposed to the internet. They're for smartphones, so they think everybody's going to get smart by, I guess, holding the phone up to their head or something. But smartphones and the internet are of great value in education if they connect you to other smart people. So, for example, let's say as a physician, I come into school and I'm going to be a teacher and I teach biology and I'm pretty good at it. I would be the first to admit there might be somebody that's better than me. Maybe there's somebody that's better than me at calculus or physics and can explain it better than me. So let's say I'm a teacher in a local high school here and I teach calculus. But let's say there is one person who lives in Los Angeles that explains it so well that the kids are in rapture and the kids are like, my goodness, I love calculus, which would have to be a very good teacher. But if you had that person, why wouldn't we connect all the kids to them? And maybe the introductory lecture as you begin calculus would be from somebody in Los Angeles. And then the local teacher would continue to teach the rest of the chapter. Maybe the next chapter might be introduced by somebody at MIT or somebody in Houston or somebody in India. So there'd be all of this connection. And I think what you'd have is what we have in everything else. The very best get paid enormous amounts of money. You'd have like the NFL or the NBA of teachers, and they would be extraordinarily well paid. They might teach everybody. So and I do this to provoke people. Instead of 15 kids per classroom, it might be 15 million per classroom in some way. You'd still have local teachers, and you'd still have fairly small classrooms, which are good. But you'd be connected to a teacher, and the price per pupil goes down the more pupils there are. So it might be also that you introduce the internet and online education to colleges as well, and the price comes down. Now you have online education for colleges, but it costs exactly the same. So if you go to the University of New Hampshire and you take a course and you're in the building, and then you go home and you take it from home, I think they charge almost the same at most schools. So there is no price differential. If you have a price differential, all of a sudden the expanding cost of education that's going like this, maybe all of a sudden it would plateau and start to fall if online education, which is a lot cheaper to deliver and you might be able to connect to professors all around the world through on. And so we look at online education, we say, oh, that's a cheaper form of things. It might be that at some point in time, online could actually be better than brick and mortar because you'd be connected to more teachers. I think all of those things to innovate, I don't have the final answer on them, but you need freedom to innovate. And so what you need is less owners, federal government telling you what you can and can't do, and more freedom for schools to develop these things. Along with that, more freedom of choice where kids go, so kids that are in a crummy school district can go over to a better school district, things like that.
We got time for one more.
All right, one more. Let's go right here.
It seems everybody's in favor of a balanced budget until you get specific about where you're going to cut spending. Can you balance the budget without increasing taxes or cutting Social Security, Medicare, national defense?
If there's something called the penny plan, if you cut 1 penny out of every federal dollar, you balance the budget. And that would include everything. So 2/3 of the federal budget is Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And then 1/3 of it is military and welfare. And they're about equally split. Military is about half of that, and welfare is about the other half of it. So you have all, that's where your government is. You cut 1% of everything, the budget balances within 5 years. Now, that'd be 1% of Social Security. The question I have, and I'm not sure I know the answer, is could you cut 1% of Social Security without cutting checks? I think you could if maybe you cut richer people more. So if you had means testing, and so if you made more than $100,000 a year, maybe we cut your check 33%, but the person who made $20,000 a year, we don't cut at all. You might be able to do something like that, but you also might be able to do it through administrative costs. 16% of Social Security goes to disability now. There's some of us who believe that there's a few people who are receiving disability who may not be disabled. And so if you had stricter scrutiny of that, could you save 1% somehow on the system? I think you probably could. The only way you'd ever know is to take that step. And if you're in charge of Social Security, say you're going to do 1% less next year, try not to cut people's checks, see if you can make your government efficient. I think there's 1% of waste in every bit of government, you know? And so I think you could cut 1% a year and actually balance the budget. But I would actually make it easier on you so you don't have to cut Social Security as much or even maybe at all. I would eliminate entire departments you don't need. Department of Commerce is corporate welfare. Mostly rich people get the money. I'd eliminate it tomorrow. The whole thing, you would never know it's gone. It's about $30 or $40 billion right there. The Department of Education is like $70, $80, $90 billion. I would eliminate it. I would send it all back to the states. We didn't have it. I grew up without a Department of Education, and kids were doing fine. You know, we're not any better. In fact, if you compare us for the last 30 years, internationally or on any kind of test, we're not any better than we were 30 years ago. We spend a lot of money, and it doesn't go to teachers. It goes to bureaucrats in Washington. I would eliminate it. Just boom, it's gone. Department of Energy probably does one thing that we probably need to keep, and that's a nuclear regulatory agency. I'd put that under the Department of Defense, and I'd get rid of the rest of the Department of Energy. Department of Energy has become a big thing for Democrats to pass out money to their friends. So like Solyndra, $500 million was given to a billionaire. Why? He had just happened to be a big supporter of President Obama. And so $500 million was lost. But there's like $20 billion worth of energy subsidies, but they're not passed out to people you dislike, they're passed out to your friends. And so it's a big system for cronyism. Probably Republicans do it too, but right now it's been Democrats for 8 years passing this out. But there are whole departments you could eliminate to make your job even a little bit easier. Many things, if you sent them back to the state level, would help. So, for example, one of the problems in Washington is we never balance our budget because we have a Federal Reserve and we just print up money. We have unlimited amounts of money. We just make more, or we borrow it. But if you're a local state capital, if you'll talk to some of your state representatives who are here, and if you know any of them, they'll tell you they have to look at every penny. Isn't that right, Tammy? Where's Tammy around here still? But anyway, you'll tell us, right, every penny, because you don't have a money-making machine. So you have to look at what is spent. So what I would do is I would send responsibility back to your state legislature, and then when you do that, they have to be fiscally responsible, or they're limited on how much they can spend. And it would be difficult. They would have to, worry with a lot more responsibility. But there was a time in our history when the state legislature was much more important than Congress. That's the kind of time we need when and you have lots of state representatives. You can go 3 doors down, probably find your state representative and tell them, give them a piece of your mind. That never happened, does it? Well, thank you for all coming out for today.